Hello everybody, welcome to Nostalgia Goggles. I'm Cass, also known as Retro Gaming Nerd, and it is Mario's 40th anniversary this month. So for this month, I'm going to be reviewing each classic Mario game from 1 all the way up to World throughout the whole week. It's not just going to be, one and done like I've been doing once a month. This is going to be a little bit more challenging. So with that being said, let's start with Super Mario for the Famicom and the NES. I no longer collect NES games for two reasons. One, I lost most of mine in the move, and two, I just didn't really play them. The NES is a very interesting console because it's one of those consoles that, has its bangers and its classics, but it also has a lot of kind of games. It's been 40 years. Is this one a banger, or is it just one of those, Well, let's find out. So apparently there's a canon to the Mario Bros. Arcade game. After the arcade game, Mario and Luigi were tasked to save Princess Toadstool from King Koopa, which means the Mario lore shorts are closer to canon than I'm comfortable with. Anyways, the reason why this falls to Mario and Luigi is because King Koopa turned the citizens of the Mushroom Kingdom into bricks and blocks. Which doesn't really matter because the Toads are useless in the future anyways. Let's be honest. So Mario and Luigi have to save the day. So back in the day, this was all delegated to the instruction manual of the game. Some games back in the day, like Metroid and or Zelda, kind of told you what to do and told you the lore, but this is one of those games where, it didn't really matter. Even if you didn't have the instruction manual, you kind of could figure out that King Koopa took Princess Peach. That's all that it is. You can tell from the first dungeon you complete. So all in all, it really doesn't matter what the lore is. I just thought it was interesting that they put the effort in. With that being said, let's get to the gameplay. So the gameplay for Super Mario is very important to its existence. Back in the day, what made Super Mario unique is the fact that it felt like an arcade game, but was a game at home and had the complexities of a game that was made for the home market. Because see, if you've noticed on the NES, some of the games that they had were ports of arcade games, but they needed something to go above and beyond that, and that is what Super Mario does. It has the sensibilities of an arcade game, but has more home sensibilities as well, such as the way the power-ups work, such as the way of the level progression, such as the way of just every little thing. It feels like an arcade game, but it's more. It's something that you couldn't get from the arcades. And I mean, you could argue, yes, you could, because there was an arcade version of Super Mario. But when it gets right down to it, it's more or less just a harder version of the NES version of the game. And I think the NES version of Super Mario is so unique because it had to compete, and I think it did an amazing job. And really, that's what the NES did, and mind you, with Metroid, Zelda, and, other games, it definitely drew the line in the sand of what makes a home console game and an arcade game. And I think that that's great because, see, I didn't grow up around this time, but I can imagine, especially having a parent that was a little bit more strict with video games because they're expensive, I can imagine a parent would much rather give you a couple quarters, right, than to buy a $50 to $100 console. I don't know how much they were back in the day, I could totally look it up, but I feel like it would be more reasonable for a parent to give you that change, for you to save up your allowance to go. So when there is something that's more tangible, something that's different, something that's not that, I can see the appeal for the console, I can see the appeal for other people, and so on and so forth, because in the long run, in an argumentative state, the NES is cheaper, right? Because you have those games forever in a technical standpoint. And that's really what I think makes this game stand out. And like I said before, Nintendo definitely did this. I'm exclusively talking about the NES port right now. I am going to talk about the other ports as well within this game, but the NES port is vastly important. And I think all in all, it definitely shows its worth with the NES version, and with the Super Mario All-Stars version does the same thing, and so on and so forth. The only real big difference is there are two different versions of the game. There's Mario Bros. Classic for the Game Boy, which I will talk about in the next segment because I want to keep that separate, and then there's Versus, but Versus is just that. All in all, I think that when it gets right down to it, the gameplay is very essential to Mario. It's a platformer. It's, it. I don't even have to sit down and explain it, but the fact that it had to compete with arcades, the fact that it had to be unique, because after all, we have to remember there was a video game crash prior to this, so Nintendo had to go above and beyond to kind of show themselves that they were different, and this is one of those games that I feel did that. Without this and Zelda and Metroid and even Rob to a degree, I don't think Nintendo would be where they are today. Like, yes, you can say Donkey Kong was successful. Yes, Mario Brothers was successful. But this was the game that made the whole market and realistically pushed Mario to go farther with 1, 2, 3. The reason why we're even here for this video. So, all in all, I definitely think that when it gets right down to it, the NES version did its job very well. And I think it's still playable to this day. With that being said, let's move on to Super Mario Bros. Classic. So when it comes to Super Mario Deluxe's gameplay, which I said the name wrong in the first segment, that's gonna suck. Super Mario Deluxe's gameplay is very similar to Mario's. The only real difference is that it allows you to do more things in minigame type things. There's a fortune teller, there's collecting toys, and then there's also the challenge mode, which is the thing that most people tout this game for. The issue with that is that you have to already have beaten the level to do the challenge modes. You can't just do them off rip. The challenge modes, I think, are interesting, where you're able to collect red coins and a hidden Yoshi. This is all really, really cool, but I also don't know if it's really 100% worth it to come back to this game, because realistically, it is just Mario again on the Game Boy with a smaller view, right? You are able to fix it by scrolling up and down, but that also does kind of come to the detriment of the game, due to the fact that if you are kind of slippery on your fingers, up and down slides, literally the directions of up and down slides the camera up and down. And if you're trying to platform, that becomes an issue. And I think this game does feel a little obsolete, if I'm gonna be honest. Because there's already Super Mario Land, there's already Super Mario Land 2, and other platforming games that don't really feel as awkward as this one does. I'm not saying that this one's bad, but I feel like I can recommend other games, especially since now the other thing that makes this game obsolete is the fact that the NSO exists. So you don't really need the Game Boy version. This would have been really cool back in the day, right? Deluxe would have been really cool back in the day, but even then, I feel like that's debatable, because I would have probably preferred Super Mario Land 2, right? At the time that this came out, I don't think I would have honestly wanted to go back to classic Mario yet, right? The Game Boy Advance version kind of makes sense to do so when they re-released those games on the Game Boy Advance, but I just don't know. I honestly have no clue if I would have been interested in it. I can tell you now though, the only thing that's interesting about it is that there is the challenge mode, and I'd actually like to see that on NSO in the future. Right? I like to see this game on NSO so you can do that, but you know, there's nothing really else to talk about this game except for that there's a save feature, which is cool. It makes it more, you know, accessible, it makes it better, but once again, it just feels obsolete. All in all, I just have to say that Deluxe feels obsolete, and from this point on, I'm just going to pair the two together. I just didn't really know what to say when I did the segment at the first time. So with that being said, let's move on to the presentation. While I was talking about back in the day that Super Mario and the NES had to compete with arcade games, I do have to mention that versus an arcade cabinet, the NES's graphic styles weren't really anything great. It was hard to compare the arcade games versus what the NES could do, but none of that really mattered at the end of the day, because arcades were ever-changing. Graphics got better and better, and arcades had the luxury to be better, where the NES had to exist off of art style, and my god, it did it. The NES's design and the way that they had to work with this console is very interesting, and we'll see it throughout Mario's lifespan and throughout these videos, because from Mario 1 to USA, also known as 2, and Mario 3, graphically, it changes so much the more they get comfortable with it. Why does that matter? It really doesn't, but I think it does tell you how well the first game did. They made a very iconic, very memorable, and super recognizable game. You know what everything is in this game. This was the start of most simple enemies, like Goombas, Koopa Troopas, Spinies, and Buzzy Beetles. With that being said, I'm very aware that there is an enemy that is very similar to the Koopa Troopas, called the Shell Creepers, in the Mario Bros. Arcade game, but they are not the same creature, to my knowledge, unless Nintendo decides to change it up. So, with that being said, I understand that they're very similar, but they're not the same. I'm saying this just to kind of cover my base, because I feel like it's very easy for somebody to go, oh, well, in Mario Brothers they had turtles, but they're not considered as Koopa Troopas, despite the fact that they could have easily just said that they were. With that being said, It also is kind of what got us used to a certain form of Mario. Mario has been ever-changing once again, even before he was in this game, even before Super Mario Brothers. Mario wasn't consistent, but this is a very recognizable Mario as well, though. The brown shirt and the red overalls is something we're never going to see again, but it is definitely super memorable. Same thing with the power-ups, you know, the fire flower, the way that the music was argumentatively simple. It reminds me of kind of like a carousel. The music is very iconic, everyone knows it. It's doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. They just did a really, really good job at presenting what this game is, and I think that that's just great. Even down to the remake on Super Mario All-Stars, it looks good, but it's never as iconic as the original NES version is. It's amazing to see the All-Stars version, in my opinion. It's great. It's really cool. It's kind of like the first time that I've ever had to deal with a remake being upscaled. It's really cool. It was really cool to see that. But I think that it's still, you know, it's impressive, but it's impressive because it initially was. And with that being said, another thing that's really cool, I don't know if it's as impressive, I guess. It depends on how you look at it. But when it comes down to it again, with the presentation of the other versions of this game, such as Deluxe and so on and so forth, they do a really good job at emulating the presentation. Deluxe suffers a little bit, mainly because, like, it's on a Game Boy screen. And that might be remedied in the future due to NSO, but even then I don't think so. I think they did a good job at looks and sound, but that's just really it when it comes to, you know, the Game Boy version. All in all, the presentation of Super Mario is just outstanding when it comes to think about it, of how iconic this game is, how they knocked it out of the park within this version. I was gonna say day one, but it took us a little bit to get here, from, you know, Donkey Kong to Mario Brothers and so on and so forth, but, you know, I don't know. It's just, I think all in all, this game just has a phenomenal presentation. With that being said, let's move on to the accessibility. There's a lot. There are so many ways to play the Super Mario Brothers game. It is one of the most accessible games in gaming history. With that being said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk about every version of it, and technically I'm not able to talk about every version that was able to be purchased due to the fact that some of them are dead, like the Nintendo Wii Shop and eShop. Those are no longer the Wii U eShop is what I'm trying to get at. They're no longer accessible, so technically they have the games to my knowledge, but there's no point in talking about them. But I do feel like I need to acknowledge them. With that being said, let's start with most of the tangible versions of this game, starting with the NES version of this game. The NES version of this game is kind of interesting because it'll set you back about $15 to $20, and I think that that's a rather high price for a game that was sold very commonly. This is just the blank cartridge though, the solid Mario. Nothing more. There's other versions that I'm going to talk about really soon, but this is for Mario exclusively. Just Mario. And I think $12 is perfectly fine for it, but I feel like there's better deals in the NES market. With that being said, the Famicom version of this game, which is a yellow cartridge, is only about $7 plus some shipping. There's a little bit of issues with that due to the fact that most of them are international, so shipping is going to be always a little bit higher, but realistically it is $7 and some change most of the time. Also for the Famicom, there's a disc system version of this game. You can get it for about $28 to $56. And I don't think that that's a bad price. I think that that's kind of weird, though, because you could just buy the original Famicom cartridge for about $7. So it's interesting that they even did this. With that being said, let's get on to the variables of Super Mario Brothers, which is Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, which will set you back about $12 solid. And once again, I think that that's a better deal because you're getting two games. So there's that. The biggest issue with that is, in a certain kind of way, Duck Hunt is kind of a dead game unless you have a glass TV or a zapper that works. I don't know where we're at with zapper technology. They might have figured it out, but I know that I've had issues with the traditional zapper, and I know that they make aftermarket zappers, but I don't know how good they are with flat screens. There's whole reasons for that. So I think $12 is fine, but it's about the same, right? And then there, last but not least, there is another way to get your hands on this game, and that is Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt and world-class track meet for the NES. This game will set you back $7 to $10, and talk about two kinda dead games, I guess. See, the track meet comes with a mat, and I'm not going to talk about the price of the mat here right now, but most of the versions that I'm seeing don't come with it, so realistically, this one's a buy at your own risk. I feel like this is a cheaper alternative, mind you, to the other two, especially since most of these go for $7 or $10. But I do feel like if you're trying to get everything with it, including the mat, that might be more expensive. I'm focusing on Super Mario Bros. Exclusively here. I'm sorry that I'm not talking about the mat. With that being said, this game has had some arcade ports as well, which are versus Super Mario Bros. And the Play Choice 10. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find the Play Choice 10, and that's because it's a complicated beast, so I haven't really found much of it. I found pieces of the cabinet itself, and that goes for $200, and that's just the pieces. So that should tell you realistically where we're at with that one. No real price. But with the arcade version of Versus Mario Brothers, I found it. I found at least 2 listings on eBay, and they both go for about $3,000, which, yeah, it's an arcade cabinet. I think that that's worth it if you're somebody that collects arcade cabinets. I do not know arcade cabinet prices, but I'm very interested in the fact that we have arcade cabinets available. It's something that is like crazy to me that people actually are selling these and that they're more available. This is once again on an easier aftermarket. There's probably an easier way to find arcade cabinets. I have no clue of their price, but $3,000 sounds pretty reasonable to me for an arcade cabinet, especially one that is as odd to me as Versus Mario Brothers. With that being said though, if you don't want the full arcade cabinet for Versus Mario Bros., you can actually get it from Nintendo themselves. Not the arcade cabinet, but the game, which is on Arcade Archives. I don't really know how to explain Arcade Archives. I don't think that they're 100% Nintendo. There's other Arcade Archive games, but this is a really cool way to play this game, and it is only $7 or $8 technically, depending on, you know, how like taxes work. But this is a great way to play Versus Mario Brothers. Let's be honest here. I understand why you would choose this over an arcade game. I hope people understand that I'm joking, because $3,000 is not unreasonable for an arcade cabinet, but I feel like if you could pay $7, might as well, right? Especially since most likely you can probably put it in an arcade cabinet as well. You could probably make your own and make something very similar. So $7 and making your own cabinet, why not, right? So there's also Super Mario All-Stars for the Super Nintendo, which will set you back about $20 to $40, and that's even including the Super Mario All-Stars version with Super Mario World. Moving away from that, let's talk about Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. The cartridge itself is what I'm kind of focusing on. I haven't really found many in boxes, but you can find this one for about $12 to $20. Yeah, I don't think that that's a terrible price, especially since if you're buying this game, you're probably buying it for either nostalgia or all the add-ons. I can't say I wouldn't do it because I did it. I did it for this video. It's one of the few versions and copies of Mario that I have. I mainly, as I said at the beginning of this episode, stick to the Famicom cartridges. I no longer collect NES games, but this one was a very nice get, I feel. If you're somebody that's looking for a game like this, it makes sense. Why not, you know? With that being said, the Game Boy Advanced version of this game is crazy, but that makes sense. The Game Boy Advanced version, interestingly enough, that I've come across, actually normally comes with a box. The box normally is about $50, which, yeah, why not, right? Most Nintendo boxes are expensive, right? They're more expensive than plastic boxes, let's be honest. So to get this game for $50 is, yeah, sure, why not? And this is just the American version. You can get the cartridge for 20 bucks and don't really see the purpose of that. I know that I said 50 for the box is fine, but 20 isn't. But I just don't see the purpose of this game in the modern day. You have so many ways to play it, I don't understand. With that being said, there's also the Japanese version of this game, and that has a very pretty red and white cartridge to emulate the idea of the Famicom. I've talked about this in my Mario Anniversary video, and I am in love with these boxes. For the 20th anniversary, Nintendo decided to release these, you know, Famicom style boxes. There's other types of this one, but the ones that I've come across are about $14 for the cartridge itself and $30 for the whole box, and it's cute, right? Because normally I like to have pictures here, but instead I want to show you just actually what it looks like. There's a Famicom box, but then there's the replica box of the cartridge and probably the box at the time of the Famicom Super Mario. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. It's great. And I think that if you're a collector, this is probably the way to go if you insist on getting the Game Boy Advance version of the game. And last but not least, as of recently, there actually was a Game & Watch version of Super Mario. For Mario's 35th anniversary, they decided decided to release a Game & Watch that played the original Super Mario Bros., Super Mario The Lost Levels in America, or Mario 2, and also the Game & Watch game Ball. This is interesting because you will pay about $35 without the box and $40 with the box, and I definitely recommend getting that. There was a Game & Watch Super Mario Bros. Game, but it's not even close to the same. It isn't that kind of a game. This is a one-to-one argumentative style of Super Mario, and I really like it. It's cute. I've bought this game twice over. I have one in box, and then I have one for my kid, and I think that this is a super cute way to play Mario. Not really the most price efficient. If anything, NSO is the way to go. One of the other ways that I completely forgot because it just completely just went out of my mind is the NES Classic, and also I believe the Famicom Classic. I don't own a Famicom Classic, but this is another way to play the Super Mario Bros. Games, and so on and so forth. I'm gonna probably use this audio for each and every one of the videos because I completely forgot that that thing existed. It's kind of funny. It came out and then disappeared. So yeah, that's another way to play it. With that being said, I think that if you're willing to collect any of these, I think that that's perfectly fine. And I think that it's really great that Super Mario is as accessible as it is. It's a game that is very fun, and I think that no matter which way you play it, either you choose the novelty ways like the Game Boy or the Game & Watch, which is super novelty, or you decide to go back to the NES, I cannot see any way that's super wrong with it. Realistically, I, like I said, have to recommend NSO due to the fact that you pay one sum and then you get a whole bunch of NES games, Super Nintendo, 64, and so on and so forth, depending on which level you buy. You have so many games, and I think that that's just the better way to go. Also, you have the whole library alongside All-Stars. With that being said, there are so many ways to play this game. There are so many ways, and I think that there's not one way that's wrong. With that being said, let's move on to the goods and the bads. So when it gets right down to it, Super Mario as a game is just outstanding, right? It does so much good for such a simple game. It does and represents so much while understanding what it is to be a home console game in the 80s. This game is just outstandingly fun to this day. It is a game that is outstandingly iconic. It is a game that anyone can pick up and go. And I think that that is one of the strongest things that can be said about this game. I think there is just so much good. There is just so much good to be said about this game. And down to the music, the gameplay, the presentation, I think that it definitely shows why it stands the test of time. I think another thing that's really great about this game is how accessible it is. This game is one of the most accessible games, and I love it. It has a Game Boy version, it has a Game Boy Advance version, an NES version. You know, you can play it in so many different ways, and I think that that's what makes this really great, is that a lot of games have that accessibility, yes, but this one continues to be accessible, and mainly because it's Super Mario, and of course they're proud of what they did, but my god, I think that it is so good that it is as accessible as it is. Mario was a trendsetter when it comes to platformers, and it still is a trendsetter today. It is iconic, and I think that alone is enough for me to say how good it is. So, with that being said, let's move on to the bads. Most of the problems that I have with the Super Mario Bros. Game has nothing to do with the initial one. Most of it has to do with its ports, which is fine, right? Realistically, the only thing that I have against its ports is the fact that they are either screen crunched or they have some mechanic that is just not necessary. But even then, right, those ports are still interesting, they're unique, they're good, so I don't really have much to say. I feel like if you don't like this game, that's fine. That comes down to a preference. But what we have here at a surface level, the main game for the NES, doesn't really have too many problems. I could argue, you know, difficulty. I can argue some of the stuff is cryptic, but I feel like in the modern day that isn't a valid excuse because you can just look it up, you can have an answer. The stuff that can confuse you is easily able to be looked up. And even then, I think that that's what adds variety to the game, especially since it's in the later levels and it's not impossible. You will eventually figure it out. And I think that that's kind of the deal, right? Whatever negative comes from it is outside of itself, I feel. With that being said, the game isn't perfect. No video game is perfect, but I cannot honestly think of anything that is game-breaking, for me specifically within this game. So, with that being said, let's move on to final thoughts. So, is Super Mario worth its salt? Absolutely. It's a classic, of course. It's one of those games that I feel like if you haven't played it, give it a try. It's definitely worth its salt, and it's definitely still as fresh as when it came out, 40 years ago. Crazy to say that. With that being said, I'm going to be talking about the rest of the 2D Mario games around this time, so please stick with me, and I hope to see you guys for the rest of the Mario celebration. With that being said, bye!